Welcome guys, we're going to be looking at EQ today, checking out how it works as much as I can show you about it, but at the same time, just a very basic overview of what it's going to be and how to use it, how to do some things effectively with it. So the first thing we want to understand is what we're working with. We're working with audio and sound, and all that is frequencies. Everything you hear is different frequencies. And we've given these frequencies numbers in order to be able to effectively work with them and understand what we're talking about, understand what that sound actually is and how to reproduce it and how to manipulate it. So on one side we have 0 hertz, which is the lowest, that's no sound at all. And the other side is 20,000 hertz, which is the highest that the humans are meant to be able to hear. Effectively, our hearing range is between 20 hertz and 20,000, although it's much less than that in most people. So everywhere in that spectrum represents a different sound, a different frequency, a different pitch, right? And that's what we're working with to manipulate with the equalizer. The lower the number, the lower the sound. The higher the number, the higher the sound. The higher the pitch, the lower the pitch. That's what sound is essentially, it's just frequencies. So we're going to look into that and how using the equalizer helps to allow us to equalize all those sounds so they sound nice and give us the end product that we're looking for. And when we're using equalizer, one of the main things we're trying to do and accomplish is to create a balance with our sound, specifically with our frequencies. We're trying to get a sense of a balance between the low end and the high end and everything in the middle. We don't really want a whole lot of high end if there's a lot of S's. If there's a lot of that in someone's sound, in their speech, it doesn't really sound nice if it's really booming and it's hard to understand. It's hard to understand people. We don't want that. We want a bit of an even sound. Here we have some things we're going to look at. First, we're going to just take a look at the actual EQ itself. We're going to start by putting it on these vocals. So this is a very basic setup for EQ. Every DAW, digital audio workstation, is going to look different, and every plugin is going to look different, but they all have the same abilities. They have the same things within them. A couple of these have that, a couple of those don't have that, whatever. There's some variations. But every one of them has different areas that we can manipulate the audio with. So down here you see there's the hertz, 50 hertz, 10K, everywhere in between. And on this side over here we have the decibels. Decibel is a number that we use to represent how loud something is. So if it's a higher number, generally it's louder. Lower number is generally these high frequencies. Low mid, high, etc. So this is the very basic setup. Down here we have LC, stands for low cut. Another word for that is HPF, high pass filter. It passes over the highs and filters out the lows. Low cut. They're exactly the same thing. Don't get confused, but it's very confusing. Then the low cut does the opposite, as you would imagine. And you can use that to do great things and manipulate lots. Then we have each one of these different bands. They have the ability to raise and lower the sound of those specific frequencies. Again, we're only manipulating frequencies. We have to keep that in mind. So we can lower the frequency right here at 110 hertz, and this Q allows us to change the bell curve, right? Less, more. What that's doing is it's showing us there's less frequencies that we are adjusting with this, and this one is more frequencies that we're adjusting. It's pretty clear by itself, I think. A very useful feature. This would be considered broad strokes, very big adjustments, and these would be more fine-tuned, getting in there a bit more precision, just trying to get a specific frequency to come out. And you can do that exactly the same with each one of these. Okay. Now that has different names for certain things. This little button here is filter type. This program calls it peaking. Now basically what that says is it's a bell curve, right? You can choose a bell curve. Now the other option this gives us, and then dB is just volume again, how quickly it goes into that shelf. A 6 dB per octave gives us a shape like this, and it's a shelf. We can make it more obvious by bringing it out here. It's just like I have to take the whole bookshelf and move it up or move it down. Same thing with this. With a shelf EQ, you're 12 dB per octave, 24 dB per octave. You can see how that works. Great. And then you have should have the similar, manipulate the audio, the frequencies to sound how we want it to sound. Generally, we're talking about balance. So as we go through our editing, our first EQ frequencies we want to get rid of. So we're generally doing broad strokes, trying to balance muddiness. Even in kicks and basses, we have to be careful about this, that it doesn't just overwhelm the mix and make it sound really muddy and not nice. So let's listen.
Got my head all up in the clouds. I'm tired and it's wearing me down. Oh no. Ooh, 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 ooh.
So you can see how that's actually making it sound thicker and fuller, but also more muddy.
I need to learn how to ask for some help.
And you hear those breaths, that little bit of wind that's hitting the microphone. It's all on the low end. So we have to be careful in the low end on vocals that we don't muddy it. But the great thing about the equalizer is that this vocals are nice, but we can actually get to sound even better. So I want to caution you here. What I'm showing you next is not necessarily the first thing you would do in editing your audio, but in teaching you how to EQ, I want to show you this. There's two different types of how we EQ. It's pretty self-explanatory. There's deductive EQ, where we take it away, and there's additive, subtractive, additive. And so with this track, we can actually make it sound a whole lot nicer by adding high end. And what that's going to do is it's going to make her sound a lot closer to us, a lot more clarity, a lot better sense of diction, and really it just gives a sense of her being closer to us, where with less high end, she sounds further away. Which is a good principle to know if you're trying to create that sense of distance or closeness. You can often do that with a high end or lack thereof. So let's listen again, and we'll add some sparkle.
Got my head all up in the clouds. I'm tired and it's wearing me down. Oh no. Ooh, 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 ooh.
You see how much of a difference that makes.
I thought I could do it myself.
Right there, so it's very bland.
Ask for some help.
And here it sounds a whole lot more present, a lot closer, a lot nearer, a lot more clean, right? And so sometimes you can accomplish the same thing by actually getting rid of instead of adding. So we can actually get rid of the low end, and that will help the high end to sound more, right?
Got my head all up in the clouds. I'm tired and it's wearing me down. Oh no. Ooh, 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 ooh.
Right?
I thought I could do it myself.
So right there, we've kind of accomplished a very similar thing, but we've just gotten rid of lows instead. So now she sounds less thick, less boomy, but she still sounds just as near in some ways as boosting the highs. So you can do either end. You have to experiment with it. You have to try it on each track and see how it's going to work for you. Does it work for this track? Does the low end actually muddy this whole song because the vocals have too much low end? So then get rid of it. Is there too much high end already? And so do the drums need to have less high end on the cymbals so that it allows the vocals to actually have room to come through? Then get rid of the high end. You know what I mean? You have to experiment with each track, with each instrument, with each thing to see how it's going to work and what way it's going to balance the instrument or the vocals itself. So to give another example of that, we'll go to the acoustic guitar and we'll hear what this one sounds like. Obviously a live recording. So let's start with the same thing, boosting the lows. So the interesting thing about the acoustic is that when you boost the low end, it actually helps you to hear the chords a lot better. But you have to be careful again, because you can muddy the mix with that, and you really want to be careful not to do that. So though you can hear more of the chord changes in many ways, you really have a trade-off there that you have to be careful with. So you can hear how the frequency, the different frequency of a number corresponds to a sound, right? So then if we cut the lows out, now that sounds a bit more natural in some ways, maybe a bit too much, but it also makes it sound like guitars further away and more into the crowd. So you have to be careful and just watch there. Again, the high end on an acoustic guitar will do a similar thing to vocals. It will make it sound more present, more close, and it gives you the sense of the shiny strings. So let's add some of that. And we'll listen on and off. So a big difference right there. You can hear it's a lot more present, close. The low end muddiness is gone, and that's going to help a lot in a mix. And so you have to be really careful about that as you're EQing. It's often really good to EQ in solo where you're hearing just that one track, but you have to be careful because that instrument might sound good by itself, but in the whole mix with all the other instruments in there, it might not actually sound that good anymore. So it's good to solo it, to work on it and hear what adjustments you're making, but then it's always good to listen in the context of the mix as well. So let's listen to a kick drum, and see what the EQ can do for that. So it's got a lot of sub lows, sub bass, which is like 50 and below, right? Not often helpful for a kick drum, actually, which sounds counterintuitive. It can just muddy things a bit too much, and most speakers don't reproduce down there very well anyway. So again, you can hear the lows actually help to, see right there, give it nice thump, nice low end. That helps it to punch through, right? And the interesting thing with a kick drum is it has two different main frequencies. Down here, the low end, and then also up here in the snap, in the high end. That's called the attack. That helps it to punch through a lot and to come through the mix and to make it sound louder than it actually is. It makes that sound more aggressive than it actually is. It's just giving that click of the beater hitting the head that helps it just break through the mix and sound really nice. So those are your two areas, and then often in the middle, you've got all this junk. Doesn't sound very nice. Often 200 hertz can sound very boxy, like you're in a cardboard box or hitting a cardboard box. So cutting out some of that can really help. And then we've got some cymbal bleed. Right, so that's EQing a kick drum. Let's move on to overheads and see what EQ does for that. So lows. Again, this is really, really tricky. Doing overheads is quite tricky and quite deceptive because you can get the overheads to sound really nice, but then it just doesn't sound nice once you bring it back in because we're not trying to accomplish everything with the overheads. We already have a kick drum and we have them mic'd as well, so we don't need all that low end. We're getting that from the kick already. So we can actually not try to make this sound good with the kick. Instead, we can try to get rid of that kick because it will be supported somewhere else. So you can get some high in there. You can make the cymbals sound a bit further away. But really, we're just, again, trying to find balance, right? So maybe something like that. It's a very quick EQ thing we can work on. All right, so then keys, similar thing. Again, you have to be careful with that low end. It's gonna really muddy it. Might sound really nice by itself again, but it doesn't always need it. Often you've got a bass guitar that will support that really well, and you don't always need that low end. I find often the mid-range of the keys pokes through. And just taming it slightly can be really helpful. Also, right there could be helpful as well. So that's a little bit of balance, very, very quick on keys. And I find that though the mids can tend to be a bit too much on keys, that's often where they sound really nice as well. So you have to be careful there. All right, so that's kind of the basic use of the equalizer. And now we're going to move into a little bit more advanced technique, but still something the equalizer does and is good to do in an overview, is creating sonic space with the equalizer. Now, you only have so many frequencies to work with, and you're trying to cram a whole lot of instruments into the same frequencies. You've got the piano, the vocals, the overheads, the acoustic guitar, all fighting for the same, between 400 and 6,000 hertz. Like they're all fighting for that same space. And so we need to create notches for them each individually as an instrument to sit in their appropriate places. So I haven't prepared this, so we're going to just do it quick on the fly and hopefully be able to see what I mean by this. So we'll just get this song going, and you watch along as I do this, trying to create space for each instrument. All right, now I'm going to quickly do a little bit of editing work here. We're just going to balance things a little bit because the snare is quite hard to hear. And the overheads a bit louder to match up with anything else. Everything sounds good, right? Let's solo that. Now, obviously, after this, I would add compression. I would do a whole bunch of other things, but we're trying to get a bit of that mid presence, so it's not just the grunt of the low end that you hear. A little bit of that snap starting to come through. Sudden kick sounds a lot more pleasant than it actually is. I didn't change the volume, I just added some frequencies. This is obviously a very, very quick intro. Now we should take out one more snare. Let's hear that. Get rid of that kick, bleed. Now this one, I've edited this before, and it's a very, very, very tricky snare. Sounding a little bit better. You hear all that bass guitar that's coming through that. We don't want that. We've already got that somewhere else, so get rid of it. Basically getting rid of as much as we can handle. Let's count my head here. So if I go too far, I start making the snare sound too thin, but I also don't want the bass guitar. So here, we could do that if we wanted to, but I think it's enough already to suit the song. Try that. This guy is a little so let's listen to that. Let's do this. It's not massive, but it does help that electric to come out a tiny bit more, that sax to sound a little bit tighter, a little bit closer together, giving a tiny bit of space here and there for these different instruments to move around and to accomplish their role within that song. All right? So that's really a thing you have to just work with and play with. One key idea with that is, let's just say that the keyboard and the electric guitar, actually better off two electric guitars, are playing in the same song, often very difficult. They're both kind of competing with each other. So if you take the key frequency of one that you want to stand out a bit more, you find that one frequency that's really nice for that guitar, and then you boost it by maybe 2 decibels. Then you take the exact same frequencies, the exact same settings on the other track with the other electric, and you take it down by 2 decibels in the same frequency. It's done a very tiny adjustment to both of them, but now you have a 4 decibel spread between the two of them. You see how that works? You're creating sonic space for different things to live in different areas. It's really nice, really helpful, really useful. So one other thing you can do with the EQ, remember, an equalizer is a tool in your tool belt with all your plugins. You can use it as it's intended. You can use it perhaps even as it's not intended to accomplish a task. As long as a task is accomplished and the end goal is hit and met, then that's what we want. We don't want to get caught up too much on, I have one equalizer on there, it's doing its job, great, move on. Sometimes you need to stack multiples. So I'm going to show you this. This is the song I've been editing. It was a lot of fun to edit, but it took a lot. You can see my snare right here was my tricky guy. He's got 1, 2, 3 different EQs on there, and I still struggled to get a good sound out of him. Let's skip ahead of here. I didn't really like it. And so then I took him to a bus over here, and on this bus, I've got another, this is the EQ here, 1, 2, 3, 4, another 5 EQs on top of my 3. Why have so many? Why do so many EQs on one channel? Well, it was necessary. So you can see here, I started doing some broad strokes, right? I wanted to brighten it up, make it cut through the mix a bit more. I didn't feel like it was doing that well enough. So I added some high end. It still wasn't enough for me. So here I added more 5,000 hertz, added a bit more there, compressed it some, added some saturation because I still couldn't hear it enough. Got going with that, and then I added more EQ on that, but I was just taking out a little bit of the 200. and it just still wasn't sounding right. So I busted over here, and then I added some more thickness bottom end here. Love this Fat Channel XT. Does a really good job of getting some nice fat low end without destroying things. But then still too much in this area, so I'm taking out, and it still wasn't working for me. And I could hear these little tiny frequencies that were just punching through, like they're getting through without anyone controlling them. So I'm coming back and trying to find them. And I searched around, found these ones I'm taking out. But again, still not enough. It's still not sounding right. So you can see with all the different adjustments I'm making, you can't do that with just one equalizer. You need multiples. Take this as an example here. I needed more high end right here. And so I boosted it up, but within boosting that, it introduced a new frequency that doesn't sound nice. But it's hard to come in here and then just, right, like finding that one frequency. You can, but it just doesn't quite work very well that way. So you take a brand new one as if all that you've done previously is a kind of summed down into a track, and you're putting a new equalizer on the top of it as a brand new track right here, and then you just take that little bit out that you want to take. So stacking EQs is also really, really helpful. And don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to stack multiple things and just go a bit crazy, although sometimes too many plugins isn't a good thing. So there's a balance. But anyway, I hope this has been really helpful for you guys and taught you a lot about how to EQ. And I hope to bring you some more videos soon.